You just never know what kinds of conversations they've had or will had, and who might tell you to your face that they really didn't care for your book.
Or men who only write women wearing clothes they remember from a hustler they found caked in mud in the woods when they were 13.
A werewolf romance written by Amber Dawn, which is so wonderful. You have sexy little poems and scary little bits of microfiction, and I think it's just a wonderful anthology.
I guess the most generally that I could define it is it's something that's contained, something that is inherently comforting to eat.
Everything that glitters can be sold, but the act of writing itself isn't a commodity, isn't about power. Well, okay, except when it is.
Woof. What a time to be a Canadian writer.
Hello! Welcome to Season 2 of the Coach House podcast, recorded in the recent wake of the Giller Prize ceremony. Lots on the show, including writers make their own awards. Kenn from Shelf Life Books in Calgary recommends a book. And what's the deal with dumplings? It's awards season. We won the Giller, mother... But we were wondering what would happen if writers were allowed to come up with awards. We asked 3 writers to create their own literary award. Here they are, named in the sequence you'll hear them. We have Stephanie Domet, Dina Bucchia, and Gary Barwin.
Hey there, I'm Stephanie Domet. I'm a writer and editor. I live in Bucchia, Halifax, where I'm also the co-founder and co-executive director of the Afterwards Literary Festival. And my award is for any writer who's gone to a book club meeting and lived to tell the tale. Book clubs are terrific. Man, what a place to find passionate readers. But going to the book club meeting after they've read your book, that's a bonkers experience sometimes. You just never know what kinds of conversations they've had or will had, and who might tell you to your face that they really didn't care for your book. Woof. What a time to be a Canadian writer.
Hello, I'm Dina Bucchia, and I'm here to tell you about a new literary award. So if I could create a new or different literary award, I know what it would be for. Something very important, pivotal really, and I think underrated. It's something that requires not only skill, which it does require, but research and also vibes. It would be an award for best clothing writing in a book. And I don't mean fashion writing, I mean writing about clothes. Sometimes you read a book and it's a total mess when it comes to what characters are wearing. Do you remember that episode of Sex and the City when Carrie is making fun of Burger because he has a too fancy character wearing a scrunchie? This is at the turn of the millennium. That's the kind of detail I'm talking about. I want the clothes to fit the character. I want people to understand the characters, how they live and breathe and think because of what they're wearing. No false notes. People spend years researching other times and places, but they could not tell you what kind of shoes a teen goth would wear in the late 90s, or a housewife in the 40s, or insert literally any character description. I mean, that's laziness. Or men who only write women wearing clothes they remember from a hustler they found caked in mud in the woods when they were 13. Step away from your computer. We do not want or need your sex scenes. Ever. Please, time for research. Go to the microfiche. Clothes are serious stuff, and people deserve to be rewarded for doing their best.
Hello, I'm Gary Barwin, the author of the selling novel Nothing the Same, Everything Haunted, and the poetry collection The Most Charming Creatures. Sure, prizes are cool and good for the hors d'oeuvre industrial complex. I've been grateful for the prizes that I've won or been nominated for. The Pierre Poilievre Prize in Progressive Poetry, the Doug Ford Medal for Literary Shoveling, and of course, the Appropriate Prize for Negotiating Prize Culture. But whenever I think of prizes, I think that we should recognize that it's a triumph just to write, or to think about writing. Everything that glitters can be sold, but the act of writing itself isn't a commodity, isn't about power. Well, okay, except when it is. Being creative is implicitly seizing the day, a little bit of hope or faith in an often difficult world. Writing itself shows a bit of faith, even if it's bitter faith, in we humans. So today, I'm announcing the Baby Platypus Prize for just goddamn writing. You can get an honorable mention for even thinking about writing, or even for having a to-be-read pile. The Baby Platypus Prize is the one prize that rules them all. It's the biggest prize in the world for just writing. Win today. Win often.
It's time for the bookseller pick. If you want a great book recommendation, ask someone who spends their days 3 feet from the new release table. Today, we got to talk with Kenn from Shelf Life Books in Calgary. Hello, Kenn. Welcome to the Coach House podcast. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi. I'm Kenn. I am the social media coordinator here at Shelf Life Books. We are an independent bookstore in the Beltline neighborhood of Calgary, and we focus on indie authors and small presses and kind of ordering in weird and quirky books that you wouldn't find most other places.
Amazing. Can you please recommend a book to me?
Yes, would love to recommend Queer Little Nightmares, an anthology of monstrous fiction and poetry. It's just came out from Arsenal Pulp Press, and it's edited by David Lee and Daniel Zamparelli. So it's just like a great anthology that does poetry as well as like short stories, kind of tackling the idea of like what really makes a monster. So in it you have a werewolf like romance written by Amber Dawn, which is so wonderful. You have like sexy little poems and scary little bits of microfiction, and I think it's just a wonderful anthology.
You don't get a lot of anthologies of mixed fiction and poetry around a genre theme.
Yeah, it's quite unique.
Can you? I'm curious. I can picture what a spooky short story is, but can you talk about what a spooky poem is or a Halloween poem?
There's a really great one. Shout out to Glass Bookshop in Edmonton, one of our friends. Matthew Stepanek used to work as one of the founders of Glass Bookshop. He has a poem in here. It is like a sexy Ouija board ghost poem, kind of haunting someone that you're hooking up with. It's very fun. I think that like as much as I'm talking about the fun parts in this, it's also just like very well written, and kind of it tackles a little bit of what it means to be kind of like a marginalized person, what it means to be seen as like an other. So it dives deep as well. It's not just all fun and games. If you are looking for like a jumping off point, this book has an incredible collection of authors from across Canada. David Demchuk in here wrote Red X, which is also phenomenal. Like I think you could just go down through the authors that are in this anthology and pick anything from them.
I remember speaking to Matthew about this when he was on, but literary horror seems to be really having a moment. I mean, I'm going to toot our own horn pretty big right now, but our lesser-known Monsters of the 21st Century by Kim Fu is, as we record, shortlisted for the Giller Prize, for example. And that's a collection of literary horror stuff. What can you recommend another title real quick? Anything else horror-related in sort of the literary genre or Halloween-y that's been out there that you like?
Yeah, I think Red X came out last year. It kind of talks about queerness in Toronto's gay village. It's spooky. There's demonic possession. It's incredible. Yeah.
I want to hear at least one more segment from Queer Little Nightmares, though. Can you talk about another favorite piece from that?
Yeah, absolutely. Amber Dawn, who also wrote Sodom Road Exit, which was like this fantastic romantic like ghost story book, has a lovely little short story about lesbian werewolves in it, and it's phenomenal. And it's one of the first as well, too. So you'll pick up the book, you'll read that, and you'll think it's wonderful, and you'll be hooked.
I felt that werewolves have been underrepresented in horror lately. You don't get a ton of werewolf movies. You get werewolf stories. Vampires seem to get most of the glory because they're sexy, right? But I like hearing about a sexy werewolf story.
If you want more werewolf content, you should also watch Ginger Snaps, which is the best werewolf movie of all time.
And Canadian, right?
And Canadian.
Ken, do you have anything on the go at Shelf Life or that you would like to plug right now?
Anything on the go at Shelf Life. We have our own podcast. It's called Bookstorm. we talk to indie authors. If you're in the Calgary area, we are hosting a zine fair on November 12th. We would love to see you. It's at Community Wise. And just pop on by the store. We always have events going on.
We love Shelf Life. We're huge fans of the store. Thank you, Kenn, so much for appearing. I can't wait to get back out to Calgary to visit the store.
Thank you so much.
So first of all, Karon, could you please introduce yourself?
Hey, I am Karon Liu. I'm a staff food writer at the Toronto Star for the past 7 or 8 years, something like that.
Great. Chantal, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Chantal Braganza. I'm a deputy editor at Chatelaine Magazine, covering food editorial.
And Angela, can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Angela Mystery. I'm an assistant professor at TMU and a longtime fiction writer. And I recently left the Walrus. So that was my latest job in the actual journalism industry.
And you are all contributors to the What We Talk About When We Talk About Dumplings anthology. Let's get started. I have only one question for everyone today, but it's a doozy. What is and isn't a dumpling? Chantal, do you want to go first?
Okay. So when John Lawrence first asked me to contribute to this collection, I wasn't entirely sure if I had any kind of experience or expertise to either answer that question or contribute an essay about dumplings. But in thinking a little bit more about my own background in cooking, what I know about cooking and what I don't, or specifically what I wrote about, in this case, potato chops, I guess the most generally that I could define it is it's something that's contained, something that is inherently comforting to eat. I would imagine that carbs are usually involved, and that there is an iteration of it in almost every place in the world. And like many foods that are defined by their form, have varying stories around how they arrive at the places in which they're cooked.
Karon, what's a dumpling or what isn't a dumpling?
I think the easiest way to answer that question is that if you think it's a dumpling, it's a dumpling. I think because when I wrote in the intro, I think I wrote that like years ago at the Star, I wanted to do like a dumpling map of Toronto and map all the different kinds of dumplings. But I think I was just so overwhelmed by it that I just completely abandoned the project, which I think is why this book is so great, because I think I realized that dumplings, they come in so many different shapes and sizes and iterations and forms that like one person cannot be like the end all and be all authority on dumplings. And I think that's why it's so great that like so many different people were asked to contribute to this book. I think Chantal had it right that like any sort of like self-contained like ball of carbs might work, but even then I don't think size would either dictate it, because I was going to say something that's like maybe 1 or 2 bites, but then I was at Rasta Pasta in Kensington Market and the owner came out and was like, oh, you got to try like my Jamaican like stuffed dumpling, and it was like the size of a softball and it was like filled with jerk chicken. He was like, oh, you should like, I was like, yeah, okay, I guess if you call it a dumpling then it's a dumpling, but it was like so big, it took me like, it was like that one dumpling was my lunch. And then the other day I made gnocchi, and then like I tweeted about it, and then someone was like, oh, those are like Italian dumplings, and I never thought about that. So I don't know, I think it's such like a broad like umbrella term that we just use for the sake of categorizing foods, because I think that I think that we love to like try to neatly categorize like every types of food and cuisines, but I think for something like dumplings, it's just so hard to have like one defined definition.
Angela?
Sorry for the not answer.
No, not at all. Angela, your turn. What is or what is not a dumpling?
I've had this argument so many times ever since John told me about this project. I've had it with people in line at like Tim Hortons who are like, well, why isn't this a dumpling? This little round Timbit that is stuffed with lemon stuff. And I'm like, that's not a dumpling. That is not a dumpling. So I've had these arguments many times. So what I would say is my use of the word dumplings would be mostly as a cross-cultural way to explain things. I'm Indian. I'm married to a Saskatchewan white human. And translating a lot of what my traditional foods are into his language of what he grew up with is not easy. So I have found ways to make things, for lack of a better word, more digestible. If you say something like a dumpling, he gets it. He understands what a samosa is, what a pakora is, because he knows what a dumpling is. He's grown up with that. There were Chinese restaurants in Saskatchewan when he grew up, so he knew what a dumpling was. So I find it as a translation piece to be able to explain to people outside of my culture what something is. Or if somebody tells me it's like a samosa or like a dumpling, I have a visual immediately. Okay, I understand what that is.
One thing I noticed after reading the book that did seem to cut across most of the essays in it, if not all of them, is that there's a lot of time behind dumplings. They tend not to be easy foods to make. There's a wrap or, like you said, a carb, but there's often a soup component, or a stuffing. And these take a lot of time. The folding aspect in many of the essays, people talked about, however, whatever dumpling you have, if you're sealing it, it's quite difficult. So I kind of wondered about that too. Is that something that's inherent in the dumplings, the sort of time and labor you'd put into it? This isn't a Monday evening meal kind of thing. Angela, do you want to go first this time?
I mean, it was so special in my house that we literally never had samosas or pakoras unless somebody was coming over. I got so resenty about it with my mother that the only time I could have these special foods was when people came over, to the point that I've made it in my life an ambition that there are no special foods. So anything she used to make special and deny me, I now do all the frigging time. I am owning that. I want it to be special because I'm special. So the time commitment is huge. And also the layers, because it's at the very least you have a pastry and you have something else you have to make. It's never just one thing. It's like a pie, except more complicated because you're making so many of them. So yeah, there's a time commitment, but there's also a specialness commitment that I am fighting against.
Chantal?
I think I agree with what Angela just said. I mean, there's always going to be more than one component if it's stuffed, and most dumplings are stuffed. Don't know if I'd say by definition, but yes, they are. And you're making multiples, presumably, of it. It's not a one pot dish. I guess you could make them in large batches, but yeah, in my mind, unless you're making like the kind that are dropped into soup, like chicken and dumpling style soup, they take time. They're special because of it.
Karon, how about you? Do dumplings do they take a lot of time? Do you have to make them for other people?
When the issue of like labor and time kind of came up, I immediately thought of my mom, because my mom considers wontons a weeknight meal. When she can't think of anything else to make, she'll be like, you know what, like screw it, I'm just gonna make wontons tonight. And she'll just buy some wrappers, like some ground pork and Napa. That is her definition of a weeknight meal. She will churn out dozens of it in like half an hour, and then she'll be like, okay, it's ready. Like, it's so funny. I think there's like a generational component as well, because I think she's in her 60s, and I think she's been making like dumplings for like decades now. So I think just from making it over and over again, like she can kind of do it like blackout drunk and still be able to whip out like 200 of them in like less than an hour and not think about it. But when she tried to teach me how to do it, I was like, oh my God, it's taking me like 5 minutes to make like 6 of them. Why? I'm only making this once a year. So I think with like a lot of foods, like there's so many different interpretations of it. And I think in addition from like different cultural aspects, there's also a generational aspect to it. I think for her, because she's been able to practice for so long that like she doesn't even think about it. It's just to her, it's like opening a door. Like it's just it comes so natural to her, and that's something that I aspire to be. The funny thing is that my partner, he's Hungarian. He makes wontons faster than I do. He's at that point where he makes them for weeknight, and he's just like, I'm just gonna make a few dozen, freeze them, and like I'm just gonna like, he's like, I only have an hour. I'm just gonna do that tonight. I'm like, F you.
Angela, did you have something there too?
I was going to say to Karon how I explained it to my mother, because she says the same thing to me when I say this is taking me so long. I compare it to, hey, you have a new app on your phone. You know how long it takes you to get used to that? That's me and dumplings, my friend. That's what this is.
I love that comparison. That's so right.
I also wanted to talk about your partner's Saskatchewan lemon tidbit for a second. What was the first dumpling, if everyone can recollect, or what was the first food you knew wasn't a dumpling? Like, it's kind of a dumpling, like a Timbit with lemon in it, but is not a dumpling. Can we get close to that? Because I feel like there were some controversial inclusions in the anthology, gnocchi, for example. But even I think samosas were added later as well. So, in terms of anything could be a dumpling, but I agree with you, Angela, Timbit with lemon in it, that's not a dumpling. But can anyone think of any other examples of something that's kind of like a dumpling, but definitely not?
Did anyone do arancia, like the Italian like rice balls that have something in the middle? Did anyone do that?
No.
See, I don't think that's a dumpling.
Why not?
But it's because it doesn't have the pastry.
Okay.
It is rice wrapped around. It doesn't seem right. Nope. I'm going to put that outside of dumpling.
Yeah, I'm looking for something that doesn't feel like a dumpling. This is completely subjective, but don't be afraid to it. But what's something that's like a dumpling, feels like a dumpling, but isn't a dumpling?
I'm not totally sure how Timbits are made these days. So I don't know if like this applies across the board, but if the filling is introduced after the fact of cooking, something about that seems less dumpling-y to me. It has to be cooked with the filling inside, to me at least.
Okay, how about this one? What about like a pizza pocket?
Blowing my mind here.
I was like now I'm having this existential crisis because like that just popped up in my mind. I'm like, because I've eaten the Pillsbury pizza pops. Like I've eaten more than I humanly should as a child. But I'm like, oh, are those dumplings? Oh no. We gotta recall these books. We gotta add this chapter to it.
What is that other than like sort of a commercial calzone too, right? I don't know. Calzones don't feel dumplings to me. I want to put them in there, but just a folded piece of pizza that you've deep fried. Is that really counting as a dumpling? We're not going to win this conversation, I'm realizing right now.
Do we have sweet dumplings in here?
Yes.
It just...
There are sweet. John Lawrence actually writes about a Jewish Hungarian
right.
sweet dumpling. It's got a plum and a sugar cube in it. Sounds delicious.
At which point an apple fritter feels like it could be a dumpling. Like it's really, oh my God, confusing.
Well, would bubble tea be considered dumplings? The tapioca pearls?
Oh my God.
You're very good at this, girl.
Now I'm like, I should have written all these stuff in my intro. Recall the books. Sorry. Thanks for having us.